Let's get some more insight into the story. With me, political analyst Daniel Silke. Daniel, good afternoon to you. You did hear there the South African public, some of them very sceptical about what happened yesterday. What do you make of it?
Yes, well, I think yesterday was a highly unusual occurrence, and to get the six top brass together to effectively stop the country, and that's really what happened yesterday. The internal machinations and power games within the ANC became the national topic yesterday as a result of the way the ANC built up this particular news conference. And I think that the real problem, I think, for the ANC with doing this is that all our attention is now devoted to the internal ANC politicking, and far too little attention seems to be now devoted to be affected to the real critical issues in South Africa. And I think we are playing out the ANC's internal politics in front of the cameras and in front of the audio studios of this country without really taking into account the critical issues facing us.
Given what you've just said, would you say that show of unity in public worked?
I think it barely worked. In other words, there was almost a grudging show of unity from perhaps one or two of the key six who appeared yesterday. I think it was essential, though, that from the ANC's perspective in dealing with Mr. Malema, there had to be some sort of show of unity, especially given the first issue and of suspension charges against Mr. Malema, which will come before us, I presume, still on April the 12th. It's essential that the ANC show unity if they are going to take harsh action against Mr. Malema. If they're going to expel him, for that matter, they've got to look unified. Otherwise, the expulsion can be exacerbated further by the insurgency that Mr. Malema is in fact practicing within the ANC right now. So I think that is what they tried to achieve. But there was an awkwardness about the press conference yesterday. The statements read seemed to lack a cohesion. And I think that's why there remains a skepticism on behalf of many South Africans that this is still very much a house divided.
So, your opinion then, the cracks are still showing. The covering up wasn't the greatest effort.
I think the cracks are still showing. The proof will, of course, be in the pudding in the run-up to Mangaung. Whatever happened yesterday, the precedent was set in Polokwane 5 years ago for the ANC effectively to air its dirty linen in public. And the party is having great difficulty in transforming itself from being a pre-liberation political party that really effectively ran underground to being a modern-day political party buffeted by personality clashes, the role of the media, by addressing the media. The party simply hasn't got to grips with how it contains its private spats in public. And I think we're going to see this continue in the run-up to Mangaung and potentially even after Mangaung in the next few years until the 2014 election.
Yesterday, of course, lots of inferences to its own structures. How do you think the ANC Youth League saw yesterday's proceedings?
Well, I think there's no doubt that the Youth League will have been angered even further by what has happened. And by not announcing the second suspension of Mr. Malema yesterday, possibly because the top brass had to inform Mr. Malema adequately about this, and there may be technical or internal reasons why they didn't announce this yesterday, I think that they will be very upset with what happened yesterday. It was a ganging up against the ANC Youth League. Perhaps it was about time that the leadership took a serious stance against the ANC Youth League, because they've been allowed to get away with a great degree of destabilization within the ANC. And when it comes to the seriousness of Mr. Malema's recent statements about President Zuma being a dictator, for that matter, when it comes to a battle between the President of South Africa and his Youth League leader, like Mr. Malema, it's the President of South Africa who's going to win that battle. And I think the Youth League certainly will come out of this even more frustrated with the way they've been treated within the ANC Youth League. But the sword looks as though it's about to fall on Mr. Malema. The ANC, as a political party, and the Youth League are going to have to seriously look at the way they run their internal politics in future. Otherwise, the ANC can descend into a backstabbing political party, which fails to address the critical issues facing the South Africa, of which there are many.
Given the current situation and the elective conference, of course, coming up very soon, what would you say would be the best political path forward for the ANC?
Well, for any political party, a show of unity is critical. You can't pretend that there isn't going to be a discussion about succession, and I think the point is well made within the ANC that succession has always been a part of the organisation. But the way it is portrayed and projected in the media is something the ANC really needs to tackle, and tackle very carefully. I mean, we do not want a situation for the next 6 months in South Africa where our weekend press, for that matter, is filled with allegations and counter-allegations from one camp or another camp. This is debilitating for South Africa, and the core modus operandi for the next 6 months should be to restore some semblance of unity and to restore a discussion about implementing policy in South Africa. We've seen tremendous strides on that, from the President's opening address to Parliament, Pravin Gordhan's budget, and then we get enveloped in these internal party squabbles. And I think a restoration of policy discussion and responsible policy discussion is what's critically needed to divert our attention as a nation from the peripheral personality clashes that are holding us back.
About Julius Malema, of course, we can't ignore that he's played a central part in the politics of the ANC. Is this disciplinary action perhaps a move to silence him, given that the ANC Youth League has come forward with this is who we think should rule the country? Is the ruling party stepping down and saying, quiet?
Well, this is something perhaps that should have been part of the ANC's disciplinary procedures for the last number of months, since Mr. Malema incurred the wrath of the leadership. And I think the ANC themselves are going to have to review very clearly how they handle disciplinary procedures in future. It's not possible to continue to have multiple suspensions running concurrently.
Are they now setting a precedent here?
I think that they are certainly saying to Mr. Malema, look, you now have to toe the line. This statement that came out today really is the most clearly articulated statement about how Mr. Malema should conduct himself during the suspension hearings. Something that perhaps should have been highlighted in earlier statements to Mr. Malema, which would have avoided this particular issue that we are dealing with today. So yes, in a sense, the ANC throughout this entire procedure is setting a precedent. But the real precedent, I think, will be when the ANC reviews its entire disciplinary structures and how it goes about making sure it reins in wayward members who perhaps legitimately have a gripe with party leadership and Mr. Malema's policies or statements on inequality in South Africa. Absolutely, these are issues that need to be addressed. But attacking the president at the same time, calling him a dictator, it's not going to wash with the senior leadership of the ANC.
Thank you very much for your time and your perspective. I'm sure this story is going to develop, of course, over the next few months. I'm sure we'll talk to you again. Daniel Silke, of course, talking to us about the situation around the ruling party and the case of Julius Malema. Speaking of which, our headlines are next.